My name is Iris, and I live in Leicester, North Carolina, a quiet community that is half country and half suburb. My closest neighbor was a woman named Holly, who lived alone with her two pet dogs. Since we both had a habit of waking up early to go jogging, we often ran into each other and would jog together for a stretch. We weren't incredibly close, but we always shared some friendly small talk whenever we met. One morning, I went out for my usual jog, but Holly was nowhere to be found. As I passed by her house, I noticed a strange man standing near her driveway. He looked unkempt with messy hair, and his eyes kept darting around as if he were keeping watch. In his hand, he was holding a black trash bag. The moment our eyes met, he suddenly flashed a friendly smile, which completely contradicted his sneaky behavior from a second ago. It made me feel uncomfortable, and I didn't want to get involved in someone else's business, so I pretended not to notice and kept running. On my second lap around the block, I passed Holly's house again, and the man was gone. However, the black trash bag had been left behind near the edge of the road, about 20 yards away from her property. I assumed he was just some litterbug dumping his garbage in someone else's neighborhood. I didn't see Holly for the rest of my morning jog. I figured she wasn't feeling well and had decided to skip her workout for the day. But by that afternoon, I still hadn't seen her out walking her dogs like she always did. Holly owned two large dogs that were incredibly energetic, and she took them outside to run around every single day. Seeing them cooped up felt very strange, and a bad feeling started lingering in the back of my mind. The next morning, as I jogged past her house, I heard the dogs whining from inside. They sounded miserable and highly distressed. Trusting my gut, I stopped and decided to go check on things. I called out her name a few times, but no one answered. Noticing the front door was unlocked and cracked open, I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. Following the sound of the whimpering, I found the two dogs locked inside a guest bedroom. They were scratching at the door and crying continuously. The moment I let them out, they began searching the house, running straight into Holly's master bedroom to look for their owner. I hurried after them and froze in shock. The safe had been pried wide open, and the bedroom window was smashed to pieces. Sensing that something terrible had happened, I called the police immediately. When the police arrived to inspect the home, they confirmed there were clear signs of a break-in. However, there was no blood, no signs of a struggle, and zero evidence to prove an attack had actually taken place inside. At first, the officers assumed Holly had simply gone out of town for a few days. That night, right after I drifted off to sleep, I had a horrific nightmare. In the dream, I saw my neighbor dead. Her body was trapped under a car, and a pair of large hands was dragging her away. The scene then shifted into a bathroom, where a man was stripping off her clothes and stuffing them into a black trash bag. I bolted upright in bed, drenched in sweat, with my heart hammering violently against my ribs. The image of the black trash bag from my nightmare immediately connected with the exact bag the unkempt man had been holding in front of Holly's house the day before. As soon as the sun came up, I contacted the police and gave them every detail about the suspicious stranger. I later learned that the police managed to track the trash collection route for our area. But since 2 days had already passed, the garbage had been hauled to a massive landfill, making the search incredibly difficult. After sorting through mounds of waste, they finally found a black trash bag matching my description. Inside were Holly's blood-stained clothes, along with DNA and fingerprints belonging to the man. The suspect was quickly identified as a man named Gavin. He lived in a remote part of town and had known Holly previously. According to Gavin's confession, everything started as an accident when he asked Holly to help push his stuck vehicle. He claimed he accidentally hit the gas pedal instead of the brake and ran her over, killing her instantly. Instead of panicking or calling 911, the savage killer calmly drove her body to his property, dismembered her, and burned the remains to destroy the evidence. After that, he casually returned to Holly's house, broke the window, and cracked the safe to stage a robbery and throw off the investigation. I thought that was the most horrifying part of the story. But as the police dug deeper into his background, they discovered Gavin was linked to a cold case involving a missing person from 15 years ago. On his property, investigators uncovered a hidden pit containing human skeletal remains that had been burned and concealed for over a decade. To this day, what haunts me the most isn't just what Gavin did to Holly. It is the memory of him standing just a few feet away from me, holding a bag containing his victim's bloody clothes, looking me dead in the eye and smiling. It was the calculated smile of a cold-blooded killer. If I had let my curiosity get the better of me and stopped talking to him that morning, I could have very easily become another missing person on Gavin's record. Following the tragedy, I went through the legal process to adopt Holly's poor dogs. Every day when I walk them down our usual path and look over at Holly's empty house, I silently promise her that I will take the best care of them. It is my way of thanking fate for letting me survive my encounter with a monster. This story is inspired by a true case that shocked the nation in 2015. A young couple, Christy Schoen and Joseph Codd, suddenly vanished from their home in North Carolina while expecting their first child. The crime scene showed signs of a staged break-in. Thanks to neighbors who reported a suspicious vehicle, police arrested Robert Jason Owens, a handyman who knew the family. He confessed to accidentally running them over, dismembering them, and burning their remains in a wood stove. A wider investigation revealed this killer was also responsible for the high-profile disappearance of a college student named Zeb Quinn 15 years earlier in the year 2000.
That fateful night helped me turn my life around, but it happened in the most horrific way a human being could ever experience. My name is Dante. Years ago, when I was an addict living on the streets of Philadelphia, my entire life revolved around finding enough money for my next fix. At first, I worked all kinds of odd jobs like delivering packages and loading trucks to pay for my drugs. But as my addiction grew worse, my body started failing me. My need for the drugs increased, so I turned to theft. I noticed an older man in my neighborhood who lived all alone in a rather luxurious townhouse. He seemed wealthy, kept to himself, and was usually away from home in the evening. So one night, while experiencing a violent wave of withdrawal, I risked breaking into his house. My plan was to steal anything I could sell. As soon as I stepped inside, I smelled a very strong chemical odor. Right as I paused, I jumped in fear because it felt like hundreds of eyes were staring directly at me in the dark. I stood frozen for a few seconds. When nothing happened, I slowly shined my flashlight around. I realized the entire house was filled with life-size dolls. I was startled, but the withdrawal pains were too intense for me to feel proper fear or care about the owner's eccentricity. I began rummaging through everything, searching for valuables, but the house contained nothing except for those dolls. Losing my patience as my cravings hit a breaking point, I started to snap. I began knocking over furniture and cursing. In a fit of rage, I swung my arm and shoved a doll that was sitting on a nearby armchair. When it hit the floor, my first thought was that it felt unusually heavy. It made a dull, solid thud against the ground, completely missing the hollow, brittle sound of plastic or foam. Immediately, an automated musical melody started playing from inside the doll. It sounded like a wooden music box, but the tune was strangely warped and distorted. I bent down and shined my flashlight closer. Because of the hard fall, the doll's head had snapped completely off the body. Right then, a disgusting stench, mixed with the heavy smell of chemicals, rushed up my nose, making me gag. What was sticking out from under the dress wasn't a plastic arm. It looked like shriveled, dried-up skin. My heart began to pound wildly. With a shaking hand, I moved the beam of light over to the head, lying right next to it. The wax mask on one side of the cheek had cracked open from the impact. Beneath that outer layer of wax, there was absolutely no plastic mold. It was a real human skull, covered in dried, stained scalp skin, with two empty, deep black eye sockets staring straight back at me. It felt like a jolt of electricity surged through my brain. I was so stunned that I completely forgot about my withdrawal symptoms. I slowly panned my flashlight around, looking back at the dozens of dolls surrounding the house. I snapped completely out of my drug haze as I realized exactly what I was standing in the middle of. In a state of total panic, I dropped the flashlight, sprinted out the front door, and just kept running and vomiting frantically. I found a public payphone and called the police. For the next few days, I watched the news constantly, waiting for the results of the police investigation. Finally, the official details were released. Right after receiving my call, the police had searched the house and found a massive list of suspicious items, research files on hundreds of cemeteries, maps marking the locations of specific graves, digging tools, and plenty of documents proving the homeowner was grave robbing. The owner of the house was Professor Victor, a famous historian who had appeared on television and was highly respected as a model intellectual. But behind that image lay a horrific truth. The 29 dolls inside that house were not models at all. They were all real human beings that he had collected. It turned out that the evenings he was away from home were spent wandering around local cemeteries, digging up and stealing corpses. Just thinking about the fact that I used to walk past that house without knowing what was hidden inside sends a chill down my spine. The hundreds of eyes staring at me when I entered that house were actually real. It wasn't a hallucination caused by my addiction. After the investigation, the court concluded that Victor suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and truly believed his own distorted thoughts. They also determined he had no other deviant motives toward the bodies. However, that didn't make his actions any less horrifying. When he stood in court, Victor looked directly at the families of the victims and coldly stated, "You abandoned your daughters. I am the one who brought them back and kept them warm." That sentence made the entire courtroom go silent in shock. The families were filled with rage and agony, hearing the man who dug up their children's bodies speak such words. In the end, Victor was committed to a mental hospital indefinitely. As for me, after that horrific night, I was determined to get clean. That night made me realize that if I kept living that way, I would sooner or later die in some lonely corner or push myself into an even worse nightmare. I am Daniel, 40 years old. I came very close to death. It all started during a flight in June of this year. My brother Jacob and I were flying from Mumbai back to Manchester for our cousin's wedding. The flight took place in the morning. The weather was sunny and clear. I sat in seat 11A by the emergency exit. Jacob was next to me. Everything was normal as the plane taxied onto the runway. I even texted my wife that we were about to take off. No one thought that 30 seconds later, everything would fall apart. Right after the plane left the ground, I felt the engine stutter, as if it was choked. In the very next second, in a chilling moment of silence, the entire plane seemed to stall in midair. There was no engine sound, only the sound of breathing and a pounding heart in my ears. 5 seconds later, the left engine emitted a deafening explosion. My entire body was thrown forward out of the seat, then violently pulled back by the seatbelt, causing my chest to slam into the strap and my breath caught in my lungs. Everything in the cabin swayed in a fraction of a second. The cabin lights flashed erratically, green mixed with white, then went dark. A flight attendant screamed something, but before the sentence was finished, the plane plunged straight down. I saw Jacob's face turn to look at me, his eyes wide, his lips moving without a sound. Then everything exploded. The sound of twisting metal, shattering glass. Other passengers' screams merged with a terrifying crash. The plane had collided, as I later learned, with a medical student dormitory. The impact flung me to the right, My head slammed into the side of the plane, and my vision was a mix of red and black. A constant ringing noise filled my ears. The smell of burnt fuel and thick smoke was overwhelming. In that moment, I thought I was dead, but I don't know how long it was before I opened my eyes and I was still breathing. My eyes were blurry from smoke and debris, but I could still see the hellish scene around me. Plane seats were shredded. Bent metal jutted out everywhere like giant blades. Bodies were scattered in various positions, blood pooling on the floor. My left arm wouldn't move. A searing pain ran from my shoulder down the entire left side of my body. My leg was trapped under the collapsed seat in front of me. I remembered and shouted Jacob's name, but there was only silence. I heard the distant sound of a fire truck siren. As I crawled out of the passenger compartment, I collapsed onto the shattered concrete of the building. A police officer ran over. He said something, but I couldn't hear clearly. All I could hear was a long ringing in my ears. I was put into an ambulance. What I remember next was the terrible pain. After receiving treatment, this is what I was left with. My shoulder was fractured in 2 places. My back had a spinal injury. My right kneecap was shattered. The left side of my body was partially paralyzed. I couldn't lift my left arm above my shoulder. I moved back to Buffalo for treatment, but the physical pain was followed by mental exhaustion and obsession. I lived in a closed room, refusing to see anyone. I didn't talk to my wife and children, though I once considered them my whole world. My 4-year-old son once asked, "Where does Daddy hurt?" But I couldn't answer. I could only sleep 3 to 4 hours each night. Nightmares always dragged me back to the moment the plane crashed, the screams, the sound of metal twisting. I always wore a Yankees baseball cap because it was Jacob's. He died right next to me. I became so negative that I once thought, God gave me life but took away all the happiness from me and my family. I couldn't work. The compensation from the airline hadn't been settled. My wife had to carry everything by working extra night shifts, and all I did was lie in a dark room and wonder why I was alive. I sought help from a psychiatrist. They called it survivor's guilt. It's considered a symptom within the PTSD group, post-traumatic stress disorder. The doctor suggested many methods, but they didn't help much. I have accepted the reality, but I haven't been able to escape it. Every time I close my eyes, I see the faces of the passengers who flew with me that day. The man in the row behind, clutching his brown leather briefcase. The young woman with headphones, nodding to the rhythm of the music. The silver-haired woman holding a newspaper. They all perished. I don't know why I remember their faces so clearly, even though I only glanced at them once. Every night, I dream of them looking at me. Their eyes hold no resentment, but they repeatedly ask, "Why are you still alive?" 6 months after the accident, I stepped out of my room for the first time to face my wife and son. My wife was cooking dinner, and my son was playing with toy cars on the rug. The house was decorated with colorful Christmas decorations. My nose stung as I realized my son was a little taller. My wife looked much thinner. When they saw me, they both ran over, concerned. Then I realized the terrible thing I had done. I had isolated myself from my wife and son for 6 months, but they were still here, always waiting and loving me. Unlike the families of the other 279 people, they didn't get the chance to welcome their loved ones home. I began to take my treatment more seriously, trying every way to return to my former life. Although I know it will never be completely the same, I am writing this story to remind myself it was not my fault. I am incredibly lucky that I survived, and I must cherish that luck. I must live well, live for Jacob too. Yesterday, my son asked, "Daddy, does it still hurt?" "Yes, son, but I will be okay." The story is inspired by a real-life accident. In June 2025, a serious aviation tragedy occurred in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, India, when an Air India Boeing 787 Dreamliner carrying over 240 passengers and crew members en route to London, England, crashed just minutes after takeoff. The accident killed almost everyone on board, but miraculously, only one person survived. Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, 40, a British national seated in seat 11A. Despite miraculously surviving what was considered a near certain death, he suffered severe psychological trauma and was quickly transported to a civil hospital in India for treatment.
I am Howard, a late-night radio host in New Orleans. I host a show called Night Whispers on a local FM station. Every night, I take calls from people who need to talk. They are insomniacs, lonely souls, or people carrying big secrets. They talk about everything: painful divorces, strange dreams, or wild conspiracy theories. They can choose to tell me who they are or stay anonymous. I'm used to the chaos of the night, but I was not prepared for what happened that evening. The studio was small and completely soundproof. Only the dim blue light from the control panels lit the room. Outside, the city of New Orleans was asleep. It was just me and the steady hum of the radio waves. Around 1 a.m, I received a call. The screen showed a blocked number. I picked up. "Welcome to Night Whispers. This is Howard." "Hello, Howard," a man's voice said. I guessed he was middle-aged. I thought he just needed to vent like everyone else. He called himself Clay. I was about to ask about his job or family, but Clay suddenly cut me off. His voice was flat and calm. "I have killed 12 sex workers." I froze. My hand stopped right over the volume knob. At first, I thought this was just a sick joke or a drug addict talking nonsense. I took a breath and prepared to hang up professionally, but Clay kept talking before I could say a word. "I killed the first one when I was only 16. I planned it in advance, and I have never been caught." My throat went dry. There was something about the stillness in his voice that made it impossible for me to hang up. "Are you being serious, Clay?" He began to describe how he operated. He said he usually found his victims in the New Orleans East area, where sex workers gathered. He didn't have to hunt. He would just park his car, turn on some music, and wait. He always chose women who looked weak and easy to manipulate. I tried to find a psychological motive, a reason to believe he was just a broken person. "Were you abused? Or was it your mother?" "No, Howard. Don't look for those cliché reasons," he laughed softly. It was a dry, hollow sound. "My mother was a wonderful woman. I didn't do it because of anyone else. I did it for the power. When you hold someone's life in your hands and they look at you with wide, pleading eyes, in that moment, you are God." A cold chill began to crawl down my spine. Every word Clay said pulled me deeper into a dark place. It shattered my calm exterior. He told me that sometimes he had made love with the victims before killing them. Sometimes I didn't need a reason. I didn't even need to reach a climax. I just wanted to end someone. He then shared a disgusting detail about murdering a transgender person. After realizing the victim's gender, he intentionally placed money in a sensitive area of the body to mock them. "I always paid them, Howard. Even if they couldn't use it afterward, they deserved to get paid for their work." I stayed silent. All my skills for handling difficult callers were useless. Clay didn't seem to need me to say anything. He just needed a place to confess. He continued to fill the silence on his own. "Don't you think you'll eventually pay for what you've done?" "I'm very good at hiding," he answered. He said he once thought about leaving a signature for the police. He wanted to dip a victim's thumb in paint and press it onto the body like a piece of art, inspired by a comic book. But in the end, it felt like too much trouble, so I didn't. Then, Clay mentioned one final detail that gave me goosebumps. When the bodies were found, the police suspected an officer who had a history with one of the victims. The whole investigation went the wrong way. It's funny, isn't it? I knew that case. The newspapers had reported on an officer who was suspended because of that suspicion. The details Clay gave were too accurate
and too realistic to be a joke. So, why are you making this call and telling me everything? Clay sighed. He answered, as if he were talking to himself. I haven't done this for almost a year. At first, it was because my car broke down. But then I found that I could control myself. Did you ever spare anyone? Clay was silent for a moment. Yes. A few of them looked too innocent. There was one girl who reminded me of my ex-fiancé. I felt bad for her and let her go. I didn't have time to ask anything else. Clay suddenly hung up. I sat motionless in the studio. The hum of the radio waves felt like insects buzzing in my head. I tried to finish the broadcast. I hosted the rest of the show like nothing had happened, but my hands were soaked with sweat. The next morning, I didn't call the police right away. It wasn't because I took the confession lightly. It was because I had no physical evidence other than a phone call that lasted less than 10 minutes. I had no name and no address. I only had a calm voice and a series of chilling details from a horrific story. To this day, I still haven't forgotten that steady voice. If what Clay said was true, then somewhere out there in the city of New Orleans, a serial killer is still living free. And that night, he chose me to lighten his burden. This story is based on a real event from 1995. A man calling himself Clay called the Howard Stern radio show and confessed to killing 12 sex workers in New Orleans. To this day, the true identity of Clay and the authenticity of the murders remain one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in radio history. My name is Michael Collins, and I live in Tampa, Florida. I hate Florida summers. The humid heat feels like a wet blanket wrapped around your body, making my apartment feel like an oven, even with the AC blasting at full power. That night, the night everything ended, was no different. I walked into the apartment after my shift at the Clearwater Casino. The faint smell of whiskey lingered in the air. Rebecca, the woman I'd lived with for 2 years, a nurse at Tampa General Hospital, had already started drinking before I got home. Our relationship wasn't love. It was a disaster waiting to happen. Both of us carried wounds from our pasts. I had my uncontrollable anger and the bottle of whiskey that never left my bedside. She had bruises left behind by old relationships and a deep, gnawing fear of being abandoned. Two broken people trying to form something whole, only to hurt each other more. 2 weeks earlier, drunk and angry, I shoved Rebecca into the wall. The impact knocked over the table lamp, shattering it. A piece of glass cut her arm, leaving a long scar. I apologized 1,000 times, swore it would never happen again. But Rebecca's eyes had already turned cold. Everything between us was dying. That evening, we sat on the couch drinking and watching some mindless TV show. My head was foggy from alcohol and exhaustion. My phone vibrated. It was Jack, my last real friend. I stepped out onto the balcony to answer. His voice was tense. He told me he'd seen Rebecca at a bar the night before. She had been extremely drunk and had hinted at threats, revenge, and some disturbing plans. Jack warned me to leave the apartment immediately, but I ignored him. I went back inside. Rebecca was sitting there with a strange smile on her lips. A large black suitcase was sitting in the middle of the floor. Rebecca introduced a game, a challenge. I was supposed to climb into the suitcase and see how long I could last before begging to be let out. In my drunken haze, it sounded like a weird, harmless dare. Why not? We'd done crazier things before. I remember the feeling of climbing inside that suitcase. At first, there was a childish thrill, like hiding in a secret cave. It was big enough for me to curl up in, knees pulled tight to my chest. Rebecca leaned over me, smiling softly. When I heard the zipper closing, I was still laughing. Darkness swallowed me, with only a sliver of light slipping through the seam. The cramped, humid space quickly filled with my own hot breath, sweat dripping down my back. The first few minutes passed quietly. I heard Rebecca moving around. She was getting more ice for her drink. I asked when she would let me out. No answer. I assumed she was messing with me. But after a few more minutes, I started feeling genuinely uneasy. The air felt thick, suffocating. The heat pressed in on me. Nausea rose in my throat. I told her to open it. Still no answer. Instead, I heard a quiet laugh and the click of a phone camera. Around minute 9 or 10, real fear seeped in. The suitcase suddenly felt less like a hiding spot and more like a coffin. Every breath felt harder. The air was disappearing. I began begging. That's when Rebecca finally spoke, her voice cold and distant. She said this was the lesson I deserved for everything I'd done to her. The bruises, the insults, the broken lamp, the late-night ER trip. I finally understood. This wasn't a game. I pounded on the walls of the suitcase, kicked, threw my weight at it, anything to break out. But the thick fabric held, and being curled in a helpless position meant I had no leverage. The noise I made wasn't loud enough, and our apartment was always noisy from our fights. No neighbor would find anything unusual. 20 minutes later, my body started to seize. Panic made my breathing faster, burning through what little oxygen I had left. My fingers went numb. My head spun. I didn't have the strength to pound anymore. I heard Rebecca turn on the TV, loud enough to drown out the faint sounds I was still making. She even talked to someone on the phone, her voice calm, casual, like nothing was happening. Time became distorted. My brain tried to recall how long a person could survive with no air. 3 minutes? 5? I heard Rebecca moving around the apartment, then silence. Did she go to bed? While I was suffocating a few feet away? My last breath was a soft exhale. Death wasn't as terrifying as I thought. It felt like slipping into sleep after an unbearably long day. The only difference was that I would never wake up again. Death wasn't the end of my story. No, only the middle chapter. I watched Rebecca the next morning as she woke up. Her eyes widened as she remembered. She walked toward the suitcase with hesitant steps and unzipped it with trembling hands. Her scream caught in her throat when she saw my twisted, blue, rigid body. After her panic subsided, a strange calm washed over her. Rebecca started planning, wiping fingerprints, deleting messages, preparing a story about a drunk hide-and-seek game gone wrong. She dialed 911 with a shaking, tearful voice. Detective Daniels was the first to question her version. He noticed the bruises on my body, but fate stepped in. Rebecca's phone. She had forgotten to delete the videos and photos she took of me inside the suitcase. The undeniable proof of an intentional killing. The trial began 6 months later. Rebecca wore a Navy suit, keeping up the facade of a tragic accident. But when the evidence was shown, her composure shattered. On the final day, Rebecca confessed. Not out of guilt, but as a legal strategy. She talked about our violent, toxic history, the wounds I had caused her. She claimed she just lost control. The jury didn't buy it. Rebecca Sloan was sentenced to 25 years in prison for second-degree murder. Looking back on my life, I see all the terrible choices that led me into that suitcase. The drinking, the rage, the violence, the toxic relationship I didn't have the courage to leave. I wasn't an innocent victim. I died in a suitcase, a coffin I chose long before I climbed into it. And the worst part is, a small part of me still wonders, would she have opened it if I begged harder? This story was inspired by a real case. In the Sarah Boone and Jorge Torres case, Jorge Torres was found dead inside a suitcase in Orange County, Florida. His girlfriend, Sarah Boone, 45, was taken into questioning. At first, Sarah couldn't explain Jorge's injuries, but later admitted their relationship involved mutual violence, including Jorge hitting her weeks earlier. A video found on Sarah's phone showed her next to the suitcase, while Jorge said he couldn't breathe. Sarah responded coldly and laughed. She claimed it was a drunken hide-and-seek game and that she fell asleep while he was inside. She faces second-degree murder charges and could receive up to 16 years in prison if convicted.
I lived alone in a log cabin on the edge of the city. My husband died in a car crash. Our only son drowned 2 years later. When all the people I loved were gone, the only one left was Rocky, the male chimpanzee I had raised since he was 2 months old. For the past 14 years, Rocky had been my comfort, slowly helping my life stabilize again. I taught him basic activities like opening the refrigerator, watching television, and having afternoon tea with me. He had even appeared in a local juice commercial. His gentle face was printed on flyers all over the neighborhood. The neighbors were all familiar with seeing Rocky sitting in a chair on the front porch, waving at them like a friend. They came to Rocky's birthday party every year. We took commemorative photos together, and Rocky was called a special citizen of our neighborhood. One morning, I noticed something was wrong. Rocky refused to eat breakfast. He kept pacing back and forth in the living room, his eyes looking at me with a restless expression. He let out a low growl when I came near, then turned away again. I thought maybe Rocky was tired, so I made him a cup of licorice tea. Rocky usually loved this type of tea. I added the 2 tranquilizer pills that the vet had prescribed into the cup, hoping he would calm down. Rocky drank the tea completely, but he kept pacing, and his abnormal behavior seemed to be getting worse. Rocky repeatedly scratched his claws down the wooden floor, making a horrible screeching sound that gave me goosebumps. Closer to noon, I decided to call my best friend Jennifer for help. She had a master's degree in primate behavior from the University of California and had helped me train Rocky a few times before. Jennifer agreed and said she would come right away. While waiting for Jennifer, I stayed close to Rocky, rubbing his back and gently trying to reassure him. Rocky sat next to me but kept letting out low growls, his eyes constantly looking around very cautiously. About 20 minutes later, I heard a car stop in front of the house. Through the window, I saw Jennifer get out of her car, holding a bag with her examination tools. Rocky was sitting on the sofa, but when he heard the noise, he shot up, his head tilted toward the door. I went to open the door before Jennifer could ring the bell. She smiled at me, but the smile froze. But only 3 seconds later, Jennifer's scream tore through the quiet midday air. Rocky lunged at her face with both hands, his claws digging deep into her skin. Blood splattered onto the doorstep, the white wall, and even onto my shirt. Jennifer fell backward onto the ground, struggling to push Rocky away. But she couldn't stop the chimpanzee's strength, which was 5 times that of an adult human. His teeth bit into her cheek, ripping off a large chunk of flesh. Jennifer's cries grew fainter, turning into moans of pain. I stood frozen for a few more seconds. I saw every horrifying detail clearly. Jennifer's eyes looking at me full of despair, and Rocky's growl directed toward me. He was completely foreign. He wasn't the chimpanzee I had cared for over the past 14 years. Jennifer's next cry for help jolted me awake. I ran to the back of the house, grabbed the shovel next to the back door, rushed back out, and hit Rocky hard across the back. He only turned to look at me once before continuing to bite and tear at Jennifer. I dropped the shovel again and ran inside to call 911. When the woman's voice came through on the other end of the line, I immediately screamed. "He's eating my friend! Please, hurry up and get here!" "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" "He's eating my friend! Please, hurry up and get here!" About 10 minutes later, the sound of police sirens arrived. 2 police officers jumped out of the patrol car, drawing their guns when they saw the scene in front of them. Jennifer was lying motionless in a pool of blood, Rocky was still focused entirely on her. When he heard the footsteps, Rocky turned his head, his mouth still covered in blood. Then he suddenly charged straight toward them. I heard one officer yell, "Shoot him!" Immediately, 3 gunshots rang out in quick succession. Rocky still stumbled forward a few more feet before collapsing, convulsing a few times, and then lying still. When I turned back, Jennifer was being loaded into an ambulance. A few paramedics checked my health, and the police started questioning me. I sat on the porch steps, watching people cover Rocky's body with a blue tarp. The blood had dried on my hands. I didn't cry because my emotion then was just emptiness. It felt very similar to the feeling I had when I lost my husband and son. After I finished cooperating with the police investigation, the first thing I did was go to the hospital to see Jennifer. Jennifer survived, like a miracle, but her entire face was ruined. Seeing my best friend lying motionless, her head heavily bandaged, I almost fainted. 6 months passed. Jennifer has undergone 12 facial reconstruction surgeries. As for me, I have suffered from constant insomnia and severe depression. I completely fell apart from losing Rocky and feeling guilty about Jennifer. I was wrong to believe that I could love, care for, and change Rocky. That I could make Rocky a part of the family and make him forget his wild nature. But Rocky wasn't my child, and I didn't have the right to force him to live like a human. My biggest mistake wasn't raising Rocky, but forgetting that love can't change everything, especially instinct. If you are listening to my story and think that enough love is all it takes to erase the line between human and nature, please remember Jennifer. I regret and torment myself endlessly for what she had to endure, all because of my blindness.